Nothing New Under the Sun, hosted by none other than Miss Cora Masters, cannot leave that out, Barry. We are joined by a distinguished panel this evening, and I will just go around the horn. Um, Miss Joyce Labner, how are you this evening, Miss Labner?
Fine, how are you?
I am fantastic. Doctor, and I am so proud of Dr. Cole. She makes me shiver when I think of what it is to be a president twice and lead generations, legions of women. And now and when I think of Dorothy Height and the legacy that she has, and all of a sudden we know that they're the chairman, Dr. Cole, you are a phenomenal woman as well. And then, of course, we could be remiss if not thinking about Miss Constance Newman. We really appreciate you being with us. Now, my generation baby, she is a true leader. She has taken up the torch and literally taken Georgia by storm and obviously across. Now, this evening we're talking about what experiences during this entire time, but I would like for you to, if you would, Miss Mastersberry, kind of discuss this special series. This topic is really important for right now, right at this moment, so we can see this intergenerational conversation on where we are and nothing new under the sun.
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of my guests for coming on. They're all friends, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule because I think all of us are zoomed out. I remember that song that Aretha Franklin sang, "Who's Zooming Who?" We're all getting zoomed. It was harder. It's harder now than it was when we were getting outside, getting on a bus, getting on a train or plane and going places. But thank you for taking the time. First of all, just for purposes of contextual framework, the show itself was born out of something that both Dr. Cole and I have been involved in for the last 6 or 7 months, which is intergenerational conversations, strategy, just working, the age group on some of our groups are ranged from 21 to 84, 85, and I mean, very invested. So, and then in my own personal life, I have several young people, many actually, if you name all the babies at the Southeast Tennyson Learning Center that on some level or other that I'm mentoring or advising, or just period, just as my mama said, just keeping their face straight. And so I went on a show with Mr. Munson. We got into a conversation that lasted way beyond an hour. And I didn't even know anything about it. My daughter, Lelania, the one who hooked me up with him, and said, "Oh, he wants to talk with you." So we did. And after the show, I was gone, done and gone. And then the next thing he came back around and said, "I'd like to offer you a show. I like the whole intergenerational focus." And so I was at a loss to decide, was I going to do it and whether I was going to name it. And then I talked to Tamika Mallory, and she said, "Well, all the time I'm talking to you and the rest of us, you always tell us there's nothing new under the sun. So call your show that." So that's how this name got to be that. And so what we've done up to this point is try to span the generations so that people, when they listen and view, they not only look at the perspective of what's going on now, but what went on before, and not only whose shoulders you're standing on, but whose work you're continuing, whose efforts you are enhancing, so that you don't feel as if, again, this is new, because none of it is new. In some cases it's better, in other cases it's just, it's eternity. I just think the fight for liberation is going to last as long as this earth is going to last. We're never going to be able to sit back and say it's done. So I've been doing these shows, and I've been on shows, and I've been watching shows, and I know we have a generation of young people, I think Mary Pat and Lelania can verify this, who are still questioning why they should vote. And I know down through the years, we've all said to our young people, your ancestors died so that you can vote. People march so you can vote. It's just really to them something that I don't even think they hear anymore. So I was thinking, what if we could bring together some people who can not only say that, but they lived in the era, people that people know and respect and hold in high esteem, such as Miss Connie Newman and Dr. Cole and Dr. Ladner, and let them talk about the experiences, how difficult the challenge was, where the struggle was, and why we were able to go as far as we were able to go. So I leaned on my friends and I asked them, would you participate in this? I want to show people, and I want them to hear from your own words how difficult life has been for us. Back in the time that the kids called the olden days, well, as far as I'm concerned, 2019 was the olden days. I mean, concerned what we're doing now and what we did a year from now. So that's why we're here. And so I came up with the title, Jim Crow to Black Votes Matter. I mean, from that. And so I've asked my friends to join in with us and let's talk about it. I know that Dr. Cole is so highly regarded for all the work she's done on behalf of our people, from being the president of the 2 women colleges, no one's ever done that, to being over the African Museum, Smithsonian, and many, many, many other things. And most of the time when people speak of her, they speak of her in those terms. But what do they know about her struggles? What do they know about how she was raised and what they ran into and how her family had to do whatever they do? I know that you're born in Jacksonville. I know that you had something that very few Black people can brag on, especially in your generation. You had 2 parents who were college graduates. You know, many of us are still dealing with first generation college graduates. But I also know that you were in the South and that you faced a lot and witnessed a lot of things in Jim Crow South, as well as voting struggle. So do you mind sharing with us how you all dealt with that, some of the things that happened in your family and the community, so that the audience that's watching can understand that these things were real, they actually did happen?
Well, first of all, Sister Cora, as I respectfully and affectionately call you, thank you. I think you know, and I know my dearest friend Connie B knows, that intergenerationality is something that I'm almost obsessed with. When I ran for the position that I'm honored to serve in as the chair of the board and the president of the National Council of Negro Women, I ran by calling for 2 things. You're gonna like this. One, that Black women must continue to have a seat at the table. And of course, nothing is more important now than our remembering Sister Shirley Chisholm. If you don't have a seat at that table, you go find a folding chair. But the second thing that I called for was that NCNW must be more intergenerational. And I say that to my young sisters with a kind of self-interest. You know, an organization that doesn't have young folk in it has no future. So thank you for letting me say that. And then just one other thing, that I feel myself now on this screen between 2 of my sheroes. I have known Sister President Joyce Labner probably for longer than we want to talk about. But you talk about a sister foot soldier in the movement. That's Joyce Labner. And though people may remember her most recently presidenting Howard University, I remember her always for her role in the civil rights movement. And the sister on the other side of me, all I can say is Connie B, Constance B. Newman, the honorable one. Just thank you for all that you do in more pockets of struggle than you can shake a stick at. Now, that's not what you asked me about, Cora Masters Berry.
But I know you know.
Ever so quickly. I grew up in the South. I grew up in those wretched, almost indescribably inhumane days of racial segregation that was legal. a period when Black people were simply not viewed as truly human, as deserving the right to walk on the sidewalk. If a white person was approaching, you were to get off the sidewalk and into the streets. I remember a park with a sign, big old sign, no Negroes, no Jews, no dogs allowed. That's just a snippet of the environment. But here's the balance, and then I turn it back to you, Sister Cora. I also grew up in a family that said, don't you dare go for that. Don't you dare believe that you are by birth less than all other white people. And I also grew up truly blessed to have mentors, like in my own family, Abraham Lincoln Lewis, my great-grandfather, and his dear friend, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. So I grew up in a family that challenged injustice, that insisted that I, my siblings, that any and all of us push back with might against the notion that Black people don't deserve their rights.
Well, you went on to do great things. You went to Oberlin, to Fisk, and then you transferred to Oberlin. How was that cross-cultural experience in terms of what you faced in terms of racism and resistance? And what year was that?
Well, I listened to my mom and my daddy like a good little girl did. So I went downtown, took a test, and they said if I passed the test, I would go to Fisk in an early entrance program. I was 15 years old. I didn't want to go to Fisk. I wanted to be with my friends. But of course, because I was an A-type, rather than purposefully failing the test, I'm just, checking off the answers. So at age 15, 1953, I went to Fisk University. And though I had grown up Black, a girl, I had not grown up poor. And so I had been really blessed to grow up in a family with, they weren't the real ones, but reproductions of great Black art. A library where the works of folk out of the Harlem Renaissance were the books in my home. But that was like a T90 appetizer because Fisk was the full meal. And there I was in the middle of the great Black intellectuals and artists and educators. And I would have stayed there. But my dad died that year. And I was my daddy's baby girl. I thought my world had ended. I just thought life was over. So my mom and my older sister, I'm one of three, I'm in the middle. My mom and my older sister told me what I would do, which was to go to Oberlin on an exchange program because my sister was there, double major in voice and piano. I went to Oberlin and I never returned to Fisk. And if I could, Sister President Joyce, you know that my story is very similar to our dearest Sister President Gloria Marshall, Niara Sudakasa, because she too was on that Fisk Oberlin track. Well, in both of those institutions, I can say to you, Mary Pat, I can say to you, Lalanya, those were campuses that were on fire with social justice work. I mean, sit-ins, walk-ins, demonstrations, all that you now know of in a different format. And you may call it Black Lives Matter, but we call them sit-ins, like getting on a stool at a counter and refusing to get up, because we were exercising our right, walking, demonstrating, calling for an end to apartheid in South Africa. At Oberlin, it was a major issue. And I was a part of all of that. So while I was in the academy, that is on college campuses as a student and later as a professor, blessed to be a college president, I want you to know that those campuses were, in quotes, hotbeds of activism. And if I can jump full speed ahead to my years at Bennett and at Spelman, my activism didn't stop. Whether it was around Free South Africa or marching against the Vietnam War or calling for racial justice. And those two campuses, I really want to speak to my young sisters on this. They grew up folk who were as centered in social justice as I'm going to assume you all are. And I know so many young people are. At Bennett, the sisters didn't get the credit. The focus remains on those four brothers at North Carolina A&T. I am telling you, there is evidence that the very idea was birthed on Bennett's campus. But there's this tradition where we do the work. We don't always get the credit. At Spelman, Sister Joyce, I'm gonna call a name you know, Ruby, Doris, Robinson, Smith
Robinson.
left our world at age 25. Ruby Doris Smith Robinson was an activist of all activists, the only Black woman who was a secretary of SNCC. And that Atlanta University complex produced more students engaged in the movement than it has really gotten credit for. And so let me just bring a closure now on this by saying that while I am an academic, I guess you could even sometimes call me a nerd, there was a role for the academy. And a piece of that, I'm going to be a part of celebrating tomorrow when the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at UMass celebrates its 50th anniversary. And so from my first teaching role at the Washington State University, where I helped to found one of the first Black Studies programs, to 13 years at UMass, we were rabble rousers. It wasn't only students, it was also faculty. There was an intergenerationality in the struggle that we need to re-own. And secondly, there was an insistence on the relationship between the campuses and the communities that we have unfortunately lost some of.
Well, I kind of was thinking, I knew about the Bennett situation, obviously, and a lot of people don't know that the Bennett Bells were the ones who conceived the idea of the sit-in at the lunch counter at Woolworths. You're familiar with that, right, Mary? You familiar with the sit-ins at in South Carolina, A&T?
Sadly, no. You know, when you hear about the story, even today, you hear about the gentleman from NCAT that sat at the lunch counters, which is very, very, you know, depressing, which is why, you know, when I have time like this to spend with such great leaders like yourself, and Dr. Cole and others, you know, I'm all ears. So I've definitely learned something new today, as well as other people viewing.
Well, you know what I always say, look it up, do your research, find out more. And
And if I
off
may,
the top,
Sister Cora, may I give a note to Mary? Do you
Sure.
use both names? I love Mary Pat. Is that what I may call you? Good.
Yes,
Mary
ma'am.
Pat.
That's my name. Yes, ma'am.
Linda Beatrice Brown has written a book about the role of Bennett women in the Greensboro 4 sit-in. So that's what you want to look up. Thanks for letting me do that, Cora.
well, you know, look, you're on the phone, you're on the TV show with at least 3 professors, so this may come at you at any second. I'm just so excited because this is already turning into what I wanted to turn in, which is a master class on how things were and how so much they are still similar. I mean, my friend here to my left, your right probably, is Constance Berry Newman. You know, I embarrassed her, so I'm not going to get into the fact that she was, you know, the Secretary of Office of Management and Budget, Office of Personnel Management, ran out USID, the Undersecretary of Africa. I'm not going to say any of those things. But what I am going to say is, in her own quiet way and in her way, that she's an international person in her own right. She's lived all over the world, but especially in Africa, which is her specialty. She also had a very, very interesting childhood upbringing. Again, the daughter of 2 professionals, which was unheard of back in those days. I think her father was a doctor and her mother was a nurse and very much an activist. And she spent, I think, graduated from high school, if I'm not mistaken, in Tuskegee, although she traveled all other places. I want you to share with us, Constance, some of the experiences you had in the South with your parents trying to vote, you know, Jim Crow, if you don't mind sharing that with us, please?
Right. So thank you very much. And it's an honor to be on with all of you. There were 3 Tuskegees. There was Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University. There was the VA hospital that was the largest VA hospital for African Americans in the country at the time. There were 300,000 patients at that hospital. And then there was the white Tuskegee. And I was very much involved I was young. I'm going to tell you about the time I was involved in the civil rights movement when I was started at 10 years old. And the reason I was involved was I was a very annoying child, and my mother sent me off with my father to all of the NAACP meetings, wherever they were in the world. Take that child right there with you. So I was able to be involved in trying to get people registered, because that was always difficult. We would show up with the person who was trying to be registered and going in the back door, but the back door would be locked. And if it was open at all, it was with someone who had 10 excuses of why they couldn't register you. I grew up at a time in Tuskegee where we had a movement that was called Trade with Your Friends. We were boycotting because you couldn't go into the store and try on clothes. You definitely couldn't eat anywhere. You couldn't sit on the benches. You were blocked because you were Negro. You were a Negro at the time. So we had a trade with your friends, which meant that all the shopping that we did, we had to drive at least 40 miles. We went either to Montgomery or Columbus, and we were really getting something fancy. We drove to Atlanta, but we did not buy anything in Tuskegee. And the third big thing that happened in Tuskegee, once more Blacks started getting registered. So they were up to 400 that got registered. The white folks decided they were going to stop all of that. And they stopped it by gerrymandering the city. And the city had 28 sides by the time they got through gerrymandering it. Now, this particular case ended up in the Supreme Court, but that took quite a while. But it was the gerrymandering was overturned. But through all of that, I learned that we weren't second-class people. Our parents said we weren't second class, that it was going to take a little more work to educate the other people about that fact, but we were going to keep at it. So Tuskegee was unusual, though. It wasn't every place in the South, because Tuskegee had its own university, and the university was a town in and of itself. But before we moved to Tuskegee, we lived in Auburn for a couple of months. And I just want to say as an aside, because it's kind of funny, I was born in Chicago, and my family moved from Chicago to Tuskegee. And I thought at the time, aren't we going in the wrong direction? It looked like everybody else was coming up that way and we're going that way. I said, I don't quite understand. I mean, that's why I was annoyed to my mother, because I was asking, why are we going that way when everybody else is going this way? But my father had wanted to be very involved in the civil rights movement and in the NAACP, and he became the president there and later was on the board of the NAACP, and we became friends with Thurgood Marshall and Walter White and Gloucester Current. So I had the opportunity in those years to see a great deal of it up front. And I'm giving the fun part of it, but we were also threatened by the KKK and chased at night in the car when I was with my father and mother. And my mother's favorite song was his Eyes on the Sparrow. And I think about that night that we were chased, because she just said, do not worry, his eye is on the sparrow. Now I'm thinking, but you need to tell that white man about the sparrow, because I'm not sure he got that down. Anyhow, Cora, that's, I'll just give you it's humorous, and not because there were lives lost over time in the struggle. And what's kind of sad about now is that we're revisiting some of those topics, and I'm actually happy that my mother and father are not alive to see it, because they certainly believed that once they fought the fight, that it would be over, and never expecting that we would be talking about some of the same issues about registering to vote and having our vote count. It just be unbelievable to them. But
well, I'm looking at the young people, because I mean, now we got the Proud Boys, and I don't know who else. It's the same thing as it was the KKK then, intimidating people. I had brought over I had sent over to Rolling Out a small article from a newspaper from like 50, 60 years ago about a Black man who put his name to register to vote in Mississippi. And because he refused to take his name off the list, they killed him. So when you say to people died for the right to vote, this man died for the right to keep his name on something. And because it was so important to him, he gave his life to stand on that principle. And I'm from California, so I wasn't raised in, and I'm gonna hand this over to my shero, Joyce Labner, in a minute. But I'm from California. I wasn't raised in the South, but I ended up going to school and college in the South. And it was right at the time of all the unrest that was going on, Black Power and all of that. But there was a situation that they had a shootout on Texas Southern's campus. They had just had a shootout at Kent State. It killed people on Kent State. A lot of people talk about Kent State, but they don't talk about Texas Southern, and they don't talk about Jackson State. Those are the other two colleges that the police came in. Make a long story short, a police officer got shot, but it was a ricochet bullet of their own, because we didn't have bullets. They were just shooting at us and we were throwing rocks. So the next day, everybody's upset. Let's go demonstrate. I ran out to the dormitory, got on the bus to go demonstrate somewhere in 5th Ward in Houston, Texas. And we got in a church and they lined us up and they said, this group goes on the bus. This group has not gone on the bus. You get on this bus. The other group is the group that's coming off the bus. They've already demonstrated. So I was in the line to get on the bus to demonstrate. And as we started heading up to the bus, I left the line and went in the other line to take you back. I was like, I got about right close to the bus. And I don't mind telling this because I'm making a point. And all I could think about was, my mother's going to kill me because they're going to kick me out of college and she is going to kill me. I have to get on the other bus. But when I got back to the dorm, I've always owned it. I realized that the fundamental difference between me, who was raised in California, and the people who were getting on that bus is that I did not live with and under that system of indignities, that I was not a person who had to sit in the back of the bus. I wasn't a person who had to sit in the balcony of a movie theater. I had to drink out of black water fountains and have inferior school books. I didn't suffer any of that. And because I didn't have what they had. That song that you all sang, Joyce, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Yeah. That is why that man died, to have his name on that list. So when you talk about death for your rights, that is after years and years and years of suppression, murder, depression. That is what you saw in those people. So never underestimate the resolve and the sacrifice that it took, much more so than now, to stand in the face of dogs and all of that. I think we don't talk about it enough. And so when I think about the civil rights movement, I came out of California. I was a Black Power person. I was saying, I'm a Black Power, all the things that we said. I was a Stokely Carmichael person. However, in the South, there was the Joyce Labners who were on the front line. There's a great picture they have of her. I don't know if we have it or not, but she had overalls. I mean, she was in the struggle. Joyce, you want to talk to us about that and you hanging out with the big boys?
So good to see my other sisters here. I met Janetta almost close to 50 years ago. Oh yeah, that's the picture. That's from the March on Washington. And that was an overall skirt that we in SNCC wore. And that's, what is it? Nasa Dickerson, who was the first female reporter at NBC News. And that was, I was up on a scaffold. And the way I got up on that scaffold was that these reporters, I met Lena Horne earlier in the summer. I was in New York that summer. And Lena Horne, these reporters wanted to interview her, and she pushed me in front of her. This young woman lives in the South, so interview her. And that's how I got to be interviewed there. I had worked that summer of 1963 on the March on Washington staff in New York and Harlem. Byron Rustin was our director. You mentioned Ruby Doris Robinson, Smith Robinson earlier. And Ruby Doris was the field marshal, the general. I won't say the field marshal, but the general in SNCC. She kept the trains running on time. She was extraordinarily talented. And I just wanted to mention that two things. One is that there's a biography of her. The title is Soon We Will Not Cry, because she died so early of leukemia when she was 25, as Janetta said earlier. And then Ruby Doris assigned me, she was working in the Atlanta SNCC office, and she told me that she wanted me to work at all the civil rights organizations were asked to send 2 people to work on the March staff. And SNCC, Ruby sent Cortland Cox and me, and that was an extraordinary experience. I guess it was about 6 weeks to 2 months that we got the march organized. And it was probably a dozen people on the staff, a lot of volunteers, but that was it. And we did it with telephones and mimeograph machines that young people don't know anything about. Pat, have you ever heard of a mimeograph machine? You make
Not a mimeograph machine.
and you
No, ma'am.
It made your hands
And
full.
Lelania doesn't know.
But at any rate, I grew up in Mississippi. Mississippi was so dangerous that there were no sit-ins in the Woolworth and other 5 and dime stores. There was a sit-in by the Tougaloo College students at the public library. This was in the spring of '61. My sister Dora and I went off to college, to Jackson State College, when we were in the fall of 1960. And we had met Medgar Evers a number of times. When we were 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, one of our church members asked my mother if she could take us to Jackson, the state capitol, to the statewide NAACP meeting. And she said yes, of course. And there I met Medgar Evers for the first time, and this was in the 50s, maybe 57, 56, 57. I met our church member, my mother's friend, closest friend, Eileen Beard, was the sister of Vernon Damer, who was murdered because he was trying to get Black people registered to vote. Mr. Damer and his sister, Eileen Beard, and her husband, and another man, Clyde Kennard, who had been a paratrooper in Korea, and he then went to use the GI Bill to go to the University of Chicago. He was a brilliant man. When his father died, he came back to Hattiesburg to run the farm with his mother. And all he wanted to do was to finish his college education. So he applied to, there were 2 colleges in Hattiesburg where I grew up. One was Mississippi Southern College. And they framed him by putting some chicken feed in his car because he had a farm. And then framed him for having allegedly received stolen property. He ended up being sent to Parchman State Penitentiary, doing hard time. There's a lot to his story, but suffice it to say that he got cancer when he was in prison. He taught literacy classes. He wrote letters for prisoners. He made good use of his time there. And he was sent, he got colon cancer. He had surgery, and then the doctor told the warden of the prison that he should go be released, and because he wouldn't live long. And Governor Ross Barnett, who was the equivalent of George Wallace in Alabama, would not release him until he saw that he was going to die soon and didn't want him to die in custody of the state. So Taylor Branch described his case as being the most pitiful one in all of civil rights murders and so on. So three of the people who mentored me, Medgar Evers, Vernon Damer, and Clyde Kennard, they were my civil rights mentors when I was a kid. They were all murdered. Two of them were murdered. Medgar was shot. Mr. Damer was burned in his house. He was shot into his home and threw tear gas in it. And he got his wife and two young children out. And he went back in with his gun and started shooting back at them. And he got smoke inhalation and died the next day. I felt like the bottom of my world dropped out, and that was 1966. He had announced on the radio the day before that any person who wanted to register to vote, any Black person, should come by his office, that he would pay their poll tax for them. And he didn't live.
No, let's not skip over poll tax, because part of, sorry to interrupt, because this is a very fascinating story you're telling, but also just keep in mind that those things that we read about and we teach about were normal things, Lelania and Mary Pat, that they actually paid poll tax. If that's what it took to vote, paid poll tax, literacy, and all of that. Yeah. And you lost your life.
You had to pay $3 a year and save your receipt. And even then, you had to take a literacy test. I took the test 3 times when I was a senior in college. And I never passed it. This man always failed me. The last time I took it, I knew he was going to fail me again. So let's say questions. One was, what are the duties of a good citizen? And I wrote that the duties of a good citizen are to obey just laws and disobey all unjust laws. He almost fainted when he read me and looked back down. I showed it to his secretary. He looked at me again, and I just smiled and waved. But you know, there were places in Mississippi where they asked you how many jars, how many sand or how many bubbles on a bar of soap. But they never allowed us to register. And I was far more literate than this man who was the county registrar. I grew up as the third oldest of 9 children in a working class family. 7 of the 9 went to college. I was the first in my family to graduate from college. And it was always very important. I always had one foot in the civil rights movement and the other foot in the academy in college. Back up a little. After the Tougaloo, when the Tougaloo students were going to sit in, Medgar Evers told Dory and me that it was going to occur. And back in those days, you didn't ask any questions. You just said, okay. He said, you can't tell him that. And we felt like we had the secrets of Fort Knox gold, you know, entrusted to us. So, but he asked us to see if we could organize a sympathy protest on campus after the students were arrested. So we did with other students, of course. And we were just having a little prayer meeting before going on to the library. And all of a sudden, this guy was in the middle of his prayer, and we heard this screaming, stop this, what is this going on? And you would never believe, but it was the president of the college, Jacob Reddix, who was going berserk from one person to the other. And he landed in front of my 2 roommates and myself, and he knocked my roommate Eunice to the ground. Then he called out the police, and they brought tear gas. Well, no, tear gas was the next day. Anyway, he had the dean come over to our dorm that night to tell her she was expelled. I mean, if you think about the injustices and some were, like this case, where it was carried out by a Black man who really lorded over a plantation. He was entrusted with his job by the governor and other white people to keep the order, and that was all. So
Yeah, but you know, right. But during those times, as I said before, why I didn't get on that bus was because I knew my mother would kill me if I got kicked out. And I would certainly get kicked out because even though we had a black school, just like the school she's talking about, we answered to a white board. Many of those colleges back in the South had white boards. And
right.
they were good, meaning white folks, as long as we stayed in our place and walked the straight and narrow. And when we start branching out to register people to vote or to demonstrate, they would put the pressure on the plantation head, which would be the colored president, and he would put the pressure on us. So we had already been told, just like her, you get arrested, you getting your comic book and an apple and you going home. So that was another form of oppression and suppression of the young people who were trying to, and many of the kids did get kicked out of school. Many of them left school and never went back. They just stayed in the movement. And to just move this along though, Joyce, I just wanted to say that I know that there was a quote from you that you said that the failure to bring, Dr. Labner indicated that the murder of Emmett Till and the failure to bring those responsible to justice for you as a young person was a clarion call for your generation to do something, and that you ended up with SNCC and with Marion and all of the other ones. And I know that you participated in some of the direct action. Can you just spend a few seconds telling us about that?
Yes, I'll describe two experiences. One is that I spent spring break in my junior year of college in Greenwood, Mississippi, and we a lot of SNCC people came in from other states, and we were taking people down to the courthouse, accompanying them to attempt to register to vote. And that Sunday night, I stayed in the office all day Sunday. I was not a good organizer out there, but I was like Rubidaris. I typed a lot. I kept the records. I did the organization kind of stuff. Anyway, stayed in the office until midnight. Then I went to this lady's house who was putting me up. And I slept late, but I got back the next day and the office had been burned. I mean, it was just that precarious. So I went in there with a couple of other girls and we started immediately picking up trying to retrieve our files so that the police wouldn't get them and therefore know who the local people were who were working with us, because they would have burned the house down, shot them, gotten them fired or whatever. But SNCC was my family, and I'm still closer to a lot of SNCC people than I am to a lot of family members. And we're still going strong. We have a SNCC Legacy Project where we do a lot of work. But having said all that, we got expelled from Jackson State, by the way. Dean called us, Dora and me in, and told us we had to leave. So we were 17 and 18 by then. I went to college when I was 16, Dora was 17. One of us said, "We hate the school." And the other said, "You're stricter than mother." I'm glad we're being expelled. We're going to Tougaloo College. And I swear, we hadn't talked to anybody about going to Tougaloo because it cost twice as much. But we went, and that's when my life really began.
Well, thank you so much. And really, this is another show actually, but I'm sorry.
One quick thing. I worked with Connie Newman on the DC Financial Control Board. And I swear, I don't think there's another person who can work behind the scenes and be so effective. She taught me I will never forget. She told me there are three things you can do with a problem. You can fix it, you can ignore it, you can pass it on, or you can fix it. And she said, you have to be careful in deciding which one are you going to do. So
three icons, and so this was a master class for you all. I know you're on the battlefield. You've heard some of these stories from the pioneers of which you are following behind. We're in an election cycle that is the craziest election cycle that I think this country has ever seen. Matter of fact, I'm sure it is in such ways. And yet we as a people are not unified. We don't have to be monolithic to be unified. And we have a large population of our people, Black people, especially the younger people, and even more specifically, the young Black men that are, as Connie would use her terminology, going in the opposite direction of where we think they should be going in order to make this victory. But it's heartbreaking and it's puzzling. And in some cases, in my case, it's just very frustrating. But Lalena has really been working hard on the Black men. I call it Black Men Project. Lalena, you want to tell us why you think that's so important and if there's any progress whatsoever, because I don't think there is.
Yeah, let her tell it.
I know, I'm telling her. We have these arguments all the time. So I just want to introduce that argument into this discussion.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's just been incredible. I've been taking so many notes. Got books to read and people to research. And Dr. Joyce Labner, you talked about your 3 male mentors, Vernon Damer. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Clyde Kennard and Medgar Evers. And of course, I'm familiar with Medgar Evers. But when you were talking about those 3 Black men
And
and how
her sister, Eileen Beard.
Eileen Beard.
I'm sorry, I didn't lift her up.
It just took me to a time when Black men were at the forefront of this, right? And how many Black men died, and Black men and Black women were working together in such an incredible way, you know? And I still feel like that's going on. And I think we have to be careful about the optics of Black men are going in a different direction, because
Right.
we've been in 3 days of Zooms, and that's actually not the case. So I want Mary Pat to jump into this with me, because I have to tell you, she and I tag team really well together. We are on emails and text messages and quick phone calls, and she has tapped me into a beautiful community. She works with RISE and she works with headcount.org. And those are nonpartisan organizations that are really leading the force on getting people registered to vote and getting people to the polls. So maybe around my birthday, I had 2 friends who really kind of started talking to me that Black men felt taken for granted or disenfranchised or ignored or exploited. And this was really kind of eye-opening for me. And I kind of did my due diligence, and it is, they do feel that way. But let me say, after these like weeks of Zooms we've been doing with different groups of Black men from different socioeconomic backgrounds, they don't think Trump is the answer. And still 13% of Black men vote Republican every year, right? So that 13% hasn't leaked to a point where we should be alarmed. The alarm is there is a percentage that are not voting at all, right? They're not voting.
That's right.
Right, Democratic or Republican. And that's the group that we're focusing on, because we can, and we only need 2% of them, get them to the polls. And Mary, please speak up. What has been really awesome is Black men know the game now, and they understand the game of politics. So no longer will they accept empty campaign promises or, you know, show up at my school or my church or my barbecue, and now you have my vote. What they are saying is you're going to have to really work for my vote, because I've taken off my rose-colored glasses and I've put on my prescription glasses. I've learned the game, and the game is not working for me. One young Black man said, now, if you gaming me, that's fine. Tell me the truth that you gaming me, then I can understand, well, what do I get out of you gaming me, right? And just be honest with you. I thought that was really, really great. And then we had we spoke to several returning citizens who were able to turn their lives around. And they said that the 3 most important issues to Black men right now are qualified immunity, right? It doesn't matter who's in office, police are still killing Black men and Black people. No more cash bail. Black men's lives are being ripped apart for not being able to pay child support. They're being thrown in jail. They're being pulled over for DUIs or having marijuana on them. And because they can't make the cash bail for 5 days to 2 weeks, their family is without them. And if you are a Black man on the margin, that's a lot of time. And then the other one, which is trade, right? Putting trades back in the school, but training trades, from trades going to entrepreneurship to ownership, because the hiring system is racist. And if you're coming out of jail, you have to check that box that you have a felony. And then the other one is the decriminalization of marijuana. So where they are with Trump is that they know he's a clown, but for some reason they connect Trump with money, not understanding that it was the Democrats that helped pass that bill, right? For them to get that money, but they see Trump's name on the check.
So it worked.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he's
Well,
making sure that
to
it
a
has his
degree.
name on
on the check.
Yeah.
Yep.
As
And
a
so
matter
then
of
the
fact, my young assistant right now told me, and she has a very, what I would call very woke family. And she told me that she has a sister in their family that wants to vote for Trump because he said, I will send the checks once I'm reelected. And so she wanted to contribute to his reelection so she could get $1,200. So that's very scary. What's your experience with that, Mary Pat? What's going on? Now, Mary Pat is a fireball, by the way. She ran for, how old were you when you ran for office the first time?
I was 19 and I was a sophomore at Spelman when I ran for office here in Georgia. And I lost by 22 votes.
Wow.
Yeah. And one, I have to say, I every time I see Dr. Cole, I just am in awe. I believe it was my freshman year. I was a political science major and I was in the most boring class ever. And I registered for my mandatory women's studies course, which was a senior level class. And the first book I read was Gender Talk. And I was like, this is definitely the department that I need to be in. And so I was molded by Beverly Guy Sheftall and Dr.
Yes.
Kalumba. And I just love, reading and learning from you and your writings, especially during my time at Spelman. But, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves are, why are people of color going to vote for this man for $1,200? It's because they need that money, right? And it's so sad. I think it was Kimberly Jones who in a viral video where they talked about the looting, and she talked about, we shouldn't be asking ourselves, we shouldn't be focusing on the looting, but why these people feel the need that they have to loot. We see people looting for groceries, and and these are real things. And I'm not going to try to make an excuse for this, because I don't believe that there is any excuse for us to vote for Trump. But these are things, and I know this is a bipartisan. I'm not speaking on behalf of any of my other, this is me speaking as me. Why we need to get to the root of that problem. But what I will say is, I'm very proud of young people for coming up with innovative ways to get people to the polls. I was on the phone recently with a mentor of mine who is in her late 60s or early 60s. And one of the things that she said was, I saw that Get Your Booty to the Polls video. It was very, very interesting. I said, listen, get your booty to the polls might not work for you, but it's going to get somebody to the polls. And those are the people that we need to get to the polls. I kind of feel like, when Lelania was talking about the fact that, young people of color are saying, you're not just going to get my vote because you align with this political party. It's actually working to get those votes. There are organizations out there who target specific kinds of voters, right? But what about the voters that no one talks to? While many people might not believe that we need a Cardi B to deliver a message, or a City Girls to deliver a message, or a video like Get Your Booty to the Polls to deliver a message, these are voters that people have not tapped into. And these are voters who oftenly go unseen, even by many of these political campaigns and many of these organizations that are doing the work every day to get people to the polls. So I'm very proud of young people for coming up with these new and innovative ways to target those voters. But I will say, despite some of the things that we're hearing, there are good things that are happening. Like, while we were marching and organizing in the summer, I can speak for Georgia on this, we made history with the largest Georgia primary turnout rate that we have ever had. And I believe it was because these young people, not when we were at these marches, we weren't just advocating and yelling out names like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. We were also registering people to vote at these rallies because we knew if we really wanted change, it was going to be through policy. And we made history again a few weeks ago when they said, listen, this is the first time we've ever had this many Georgians registered to vote. Out of a 10 million population, 7 million Georgians are now registered to vote. On the first week of early voting, the first week, which was last week, 1 million Georgians cast their early voting ballots. That is amazing. And I believe, you know, we're concluding the second week, we're going to get 1 million more. And it's because we are realizing that, you know what, for so many years, we've heard our ancestors, our grandparents say, vote like your life depends on it. We realize now that it actually does. And this election is a life or death election for us. And I believe that, you know, not only are young people here, and I commend all of the people that, you know, I've worked alongside the past few months in the struggle, because not only have we been able to create change and hold our elected officials accountable within this country, but we've also encouraged other people of color across the world to do the same thing, whether if it was in the United Kingdom or, you know, in Europe, or even now Nigeria, where, you know, Black young people are saying enough is enough, my life matters, and it's time to hold elected officials accountable. So I think right now, you know, there are a lot of young people who are feeling like, I'm not really excited about these candidates that we have running for office. You know, Kamala Harris doesn't float my boat, you know, and they're very, they will criticize, but I believe that they know what they have to do. And in doing that, they do have the right to hold people accountable, right? But in holding people accountable or acknowledging what they've done in the past, saying, listen, I'm gonna vote for you, but what we're not about to do is this, right? We need to talk about decriminalization of marijuana. We need to talk about other options instead of just locking us up. We need to think about, you know, beyond just qualified immunity, other ways in which we can hold officers accountable for their actions. So while, you know, there are some young people who are saying things like, I don't want to vote, or I'm gonna vote for Trump, there are 10 or 20 more young people that are like, listen, enough is enough. We need to do more. We need to be more. But if there is a young person watching this right now, I want you to hear my words. Yes, vote in the presidential election, but that is not the only thing on your ballot. Please go online right now and view your ballot before you even show up to the polls. There are pieces of legislation that are going to be on the ballot. There are going to be Senate races. You know, a lot of people talk about the fact that Barack Obama didn't do anything for Black people. How can Barack Obama have done anything for Black people if we didn't do our part and vote down the ballot and ensure that he had a Democratic Congress and a Democratic Senate? In order for us to get true change under Joe Biden's administration, he's going to need a Democratic Senate. Georgia is going to be looked at after November the 3rd because we might have 2 runoffs for Senate, and we may be able to determine who will control the Senate, right? So if we want all of these policies changed, if we really want to see a difference happen in this country, we're going to have to vote down the ballot. We're going to have to vote local. And if you're tired of your local elected officials not doing anything, what are you waiting for? Like, you're good enough to work on their campaigns. You're good enough to make phone calls and text bank for them. You are literally good enough to run your own campaign. So I've taken up a lot of time, Mrs. Cora, but thank you so much. I just had to say that.
And
No,
just to
that's
really
what- that's
quickly
what you're here
piggyback,
for.
yeah, just to really quick piggyback everything she said. The other thing that we are helping to do in the Black community and the community that feels marginalized is, like, Trump came up with the platinum plan, right? Which made Black people feel like, oh, I'm gonna get some money in my bank account tonight. But we've been able to successfully unpack that as an empty campaign promise, right? Because he has the Senate in his back pocket. So he could have done the platinum plan for Black people these 4 years. So it's the other way that you do voter suppression, and that's disinformation, or quick shiny taglines and sound bites.
And signing the stimulus checks. But I just want to make one point. I have to. And I'm listening to these young people. And I hear Lelania kind of romanticize how we all work together, but let me say something. The leaders are these women. In her and Dr. Labner's day and in my day, we did the work. They got the glory.
Men led and women worked.
The men led and the women worked. And that was the way it went. And 90% of the reason anything was successful was because Joyce was in the office organizing. Or I can just go down the list of the women that are unsung heroes that really are responsible for the movements. And I look up today and the defining voices are women.
Yep.
If you turn on that television, and I call them television advocates, television activists, most of your television activists that are being on there are women. I can go down that list. And as far as I'm concerned, my leader, if you got to have a leader in the country today, would be Tamika Mallory. So this is what's different. Women always did the work, but we never really did the lead. What do you think about that, Mr. Steve?
Oh, sounds correct. Definitely accurate.
You know, I started this show and I keep trying to talk to him about getting adding men to the show, and tell him what you say to me.
It's not their moment. It is definitely not their moment.
So
Or-
anybody else want, I'm sorry.
I may say so. SNCC was different, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that your late husband, Marion Barry, was our first chairman. It was different because women had the equality in SNCC. Some people say, well, why were all the chairmen of SNCC male? We didn't have a lot of sensitivity to being female in that context. All of us did the work. The guys worked very hard too. They were on the front lines. If they put their bodies out in front of ours to keep us from getting hurt. You always rode in the back seat of a car so that if a car was going to be shot up, the guy driving it would take the bullet for you. But there, some women did emerge. If I think about Fannie Lou Hamer, Ms. Hamer always wanted to work with the young people. She said she didn't want to work with SCLC or NAACP because those people were too set in their ways. She wanted to work with the young people because they were vital and they would take chances. They were courageous. Ella Baker was another woman who emerged. Both of them, have made their legacies are very, very real.
Yeah, I agree about Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a presence, but Ella Baker's legacy was delayed. I mean, she was not on the front line. Her name didn't come up and wasn't used a lot until later on. Now she's everybody's hero, and I always knew about her.
For a long time. And she was older too. Miss Baker, whom I knew quite well. But Miss Baker was graduated from Shaw University in the 1920s, for example. So by the time the 1960s came around, she had been organizing co-ops in New York. She was the field secretary for the NAACP, the job that Gloucester Current eventually had. So she went into the Deep South, into all these places where there were NAACP branches. And even though it was outlawed in the Deep South, the people met underground. And that's when she met Rosa Parks back then in the 40s.
Yeah.
So
well, I have so much respect to her, and we have a program here in Washington at Southeast Cincinnati called Blacks and Wax, and there are very few of the productions in 14 years where we did not portray her as a character, because I have a very special affinity for Ella Baker. I knew a lot about her. Marion talked about her a lot. I knew her role in SNCC, and just to the young people, Black women have always been in the struggle. We've not always been ahead, but in the front, but we've always been the backbone. You're about to say something, Dr. Cole?
Well, actually, I was going to just lift up yet another name of the struggle for civil rights and women's rights. And I'm going to call the name of a woman who you knew ever so well, Sister Cora, Dr. Dorothy Irene Height.
Right.
I think the point that all of us could agree on is that in that period that we call the movement, Black women, as Dr. Dorothy Irene Height said, didn't always get to do what they
wanted to do, but they always
did what they
had to do.
And so there is a long history. Certainly, I would say even going back to 401 years ago, when Black women have had to deal with that double jeopardy. We have had to deal with systemic racism and systemic sexism. And what that has meant is that in that larger world of white folk with their insane notions about white supremacy, that Black women were put down. But this is a country that has bred and fed patriarchy. And that means that Black women often in their own homes and workplaces with Black men were not acknowledged for who they were.
Yeah, you're absolutely
is
right.
A different day.
It
When
is
I
a different
look at
day.
These two sister leaders, when I think about the Black Lives Matter movement having been founded by 3 young Black women, I know my bro is right. This is our moment.
It is a moment.
This is our moment. And whatever one happens to think about Senator Kamala Harris,
It's her time.
I mean, it is a woman of color, of Jamaican and South Asian ancestry who identifies as a Black woman.
Raised in Oakland.
All right.
And,
Oakland, and
who
then
is qualified. Nobody is doing anybody any special favor by supporting her because she is qualified to
Absolutely.
do that job.
exactly.
She's doing
So
it
I
right.
have to tell you, just being with you young sister leaders, this is what gives me hope. Because to me, the most dangerous thing of this era is hopelessness.
Yeah.
Hopelessness. That
Remember
is
our
what
friend Jesse
Mary Pat
Jackson?
was talking about.
Keep
You
hope
know,
alive.
Keep hope alive.
We gotta, and my hope is it is in your generation.
I mentor a lot of young people starting out, because I was, like Janetta, was a professor for so long when you worked with young people. And I give a lot of speeches. And one of the things that I would often talk about is how the Algerian psychiatrist, Frantz Fanon, to paraphrase him, said that each generation must find its mission, fulfill it or betray it. And I think that we carried the struggle up to a point, the last generation that lived under segregation. And then you turn it over to another generation. So I think, a lot of our role now is to help to empower the young people, give them the support so that you can go out there. And I will be the last person to question or challenge why you're doing it your way. Because you see the problem the way you see it. And I think the problems today are infinitely more complex than it was when we were going for the right to vote. It was more dangerous back then. And much.
Sure, I mean, I agree with you 100%. It is more complex. And I do want us to get together and dig deeper into just how the differences are between then and now. It was more dangerous then, it's more complex now, but it's also getting very dangerous now.
Yeah.
We have protest in our veins. I know that you and I do. And in the height or the depth of COVID, they were having the marches down in Black Lives Plaza, and I literally literally was having a physical reaction to not being able to be down there.
I
So
went
I
down.
finally called somebody, and the guy came and drove me. I had on my mask, and what I did was, my daughter Tamara said I was doing side street protesting. I mean, it wasn't right in there, but I was down on the side. I was across the street. I was no justice, no peace. I had to get down there. I had to feel it. I just could not let that happen, and I couldn't watch it on TV. So that fire that's in us, I see that with these young people. And so, as Munson said, when he closes, you don't always, and I'm not trying to preempt your closing because you can say it again, you say it better than me. You don't always have to be in the streets, but you have to stay in the struggle. So this is what this show is. It's a show of how we stayed in the struggle. Many of us are not able to get in the streets. These young people are there for us. They're carrying the mantle. We're there to be there for them. And I want to do another show. This is just a show that tells me that we got a lot more to talk about. I want to thank everybody for coming on. I know we went over time, but there's no such thing as running out of time when time is being used like we've been used. So thank you so much for coming. Munson, do you want to say something before we leave? I know I took your tagline, but still.
I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming on to Nothing New Under the Sun. It's been amazing. You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. So clearly I have nothing else to say. It's just been beautiful to listen and to experience this intergenerational conversation that is amazing. I think this is the moment. I think more people should see it. I've encouraged Ms. Masterberry to really continue, all of you, to me, to tell your stories. It is, all of you deserve a documentary. Ms. Mastersberry knows Leilania. I literally say every day that she needs to have that, because you want to have a documentary while you can see it and approve it and clap for yourself and know that they kept everything in order. So love you all very much, respect you all very much. And I think you've closed it out very well. Ms. Cora Mastersberry, Nothing New Under the Sun, a seat at the table for all of us to gain knowledge and understand that every generation has its place in history.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.